So I'm Roger with my Campfire Tales. The other day I'm driving along and all of a sudden I smell this skunk. Oh, it's just really a strong smell. And a lot of people, you guys should probably just kind of, plug your nose and try to just get past it and not give it another thought. But for me, it brought back a lot of memories about my childhood and growing up. It was important for my entire family survival to rely on skunks. And, my dad and his uncles, his brothers and sister grew up on a farm out in the woods in Michigan, many years ago in the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And it was important for them, right after the Depression to learn to live off the land. They had to hunt and fish and gather berries and, just wherever they could to make ends meet. And one of the important income sources for them was trapping, and a skunk pelt back in the 40s and 50s was worth $10, and that's worth well over $100 on today's money. And so one of my uncles decided, well, hey, I'm going for it. I'm going to figure this skunk thing out, and I'm going to figure out how to make some money. And so after kind of learning through experience, he figured out if he took bear grease and he put it on his arm and the skunk sprayed on it, the bear grease would protect him. But if he didn't, it would just eat right through his skin. So he would grease up his arms and he would go out tracking skunks and track them through the snow and track them to their den. And he would just reach his arm in and grab the skunk and bring it out and dispatch it and skin it and go sell the pelt. Well, this process kind of had a lot of interesting stories to it. Sometimes people would say, well, did you ever get bit by a skunk? And he says, oh yeah, quite a few times. But back then, $10 is $10, and and he was lucky he didn't get rabies or anything. And somebody else said, well, what would happen with some of these pelts? Did you ever have any trouble selling them? And he says, yeah. He says, if the skunk sprayed on himself while he was still in the den and it got on the fur, my buyer wouldn't buy it, with that strong smell to it. So I would have to take and tie the pelt. I would skin it and I'd tie the pelt on a stick. I couldn't wait for it to just kind of dry out normally. I would tie it on a stick and I would stick it in the back window of my car and out the back window and just drive around through town until the smell went away. And he said, I did that until the police kind of pulled me over and says, no, you can't do that in town. I mean, just, people are complaining and stuff. And then one of my other uncles chipped in. He says, yeah, I went with Elias once, and he said, I had one of these skunks sprayed on my shoe. And so the next day I had to go to school. And so I went to school, and it was one of these one-room schoolhouse situations back then. And people were looking around the room, and they started pointing at me, and they said, Leonard, we think it's you. That's got that skunk smell on you. You have to go home and change your shoes. And he says, I don't have another pair of shoes. One of my other uncles says, yeah. He says, we had to, back then we had to wait till we're 6 years old to get our first pair of shoes. And if we wanted to go out and play during the wintertime, we'd just walk around in bare feet in the snow until it was kind of cold to start with. But then, it just got numb after a while. You could do it. And said, yeah, with Leonard, they just let him take his shoes off and put them outside the schoolhouse until, the next day. And he figured out how to, get the smell to go away a little bit, and they let him back in class. Next time you go by, you smell a skunk out there and just, you think, well, just those are good for nothing things or whatever. That's not, I want you to think of this story, because that unlucky skunk that got hit by a car, I mean, some of those skunks back then, they were important to a lot of people. So anyway, or at least to my family anyway. So anyway, that's my story for this week. I smelled a skunk, and, that's how it went. We hope that you enjoyed this week's telling of Campfire Tales. Please remember to hit subscribe to make sure that you get the announcements for next week's upcoming activities, as well as the new topics for the Campfire Tales. Please also share the fun that we have here and let your friends know about our website, RogersOutdoorChannel.org.